Hello to everyone. I'm Nevena Škrbić-Alempijević, and on behalf of SIEF board, I'm delighted to welcome you to the workshop Writing Grants for the Wenner Grant Foundation with its president, Dr. Danielin Rutherford. Before starting, I would just note that this session is being recorded so that all the delegates interested in these topics who are here or could not attend can address it later on as well. The main goal of the Wenner Grant Foundation is to foster and support anthropological research worldwide through a variety of programs like grants, fellowships, conferences, and capacity building projects. The foundation publishes, among other editions, the international journal Current Anthropology. The Wenner Grant Foundation is also a generous supporter of SIEF activities, and for years now, their grants have been making SIEF congresses more accessible, more inclusive, and affordable to all groups of delegates. Thank you, Wenner Grant, for recognizing us as trusted partners. The foundation also promotes intergenerational engagement, and this workshop is a perfect opportunity to do so. Why is that? Because the workshop is organized in the frame of the mentoring program in collaboration between the Young Scholars Working Group and SIEF board. That is why Nada Kujundžić, a member of the working group, will be moderating this workshop with me. So Nada.
Hi, and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us.
The structure of the workshop looks like this. In the first part, Danielin Rutherford will present various funding opportunities that Wenner Grant provides. She will outline the review process and offer some, I'm sure, helpful tips on how to write a successful proposal. Then we will have some time for questions and comments. You can write questions in the chat already during the presentation, and we will refer to them in the discussion. Also, after Danielin's presentation, you can use the raise hand function and ask the questions directly. Let me now share a few notes about our distinguished presenter from her biography. Danielin Rutherford received her bachelor's degree in biology and history from Stanford University and her doctorate in anthropology with a minor in Southeast Asian studies from Cornell University. She taught at Goldsmiths College in London and at the University of Chicago. Before joining academia, she worked as an English teacher in Central Java with Volunteers in Asia and as associate director of a nonprofit, the International Development Exchange. She is a past president of the Society for Cultural Anthropology and the author of 3 books on West Papua, where she has conducted the bulk of her research. The Wenner Grant Foundation actually was the first to support her research in West Papua. Now, as the president of the foundation since 2017, Danielin Rutherford is dedicated to supporting other scholars in their research and to contributing to anthropology in that role. Danielin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. That's very kind of you, Nevena. And thank you all for having me. I'm really delighted to be able to join you. It's early in the morning in New York, so I will say good morning to you. Our agenda, I think Nevena went over it quite well. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Wenner Grant. I want to talk a little bit about how we're facing the current moment with the global pandemic, which is ongoing, explain our review process, go over our project description questions, and tell you a little bit about our other programs, including some new ones. And my presentation is going to be geared towards applicants for the dissertation fieldwork and post-PhD research grant programs, with a few words about our new engaged research grants. But I will welcome questions about any and all of our programs, basically anything that we do. This is going to be informal, and I'm really looking forward to answering your questions after I finish talking with you. I'm going to share some slides just because I have some visuals here. Okay, great. So the Wenner Gren Foundation was created by 2 men who knew pretty much nothing about the discipline of anthropology. One of these men was Axel Wenner, the founder of the Electrolux corporations, thinks vacuum cleaners and refrigerators. He was also one of the wealthiest men in the world, and he created the foundation in 1941 when he had sold a yacht in Florida and needed to put the money in the United States without having to pay US taxes. He called it the Viking Fund, and it was for the betterment of whatever. He ended up deciding to use the foundation to support anthropology after meeting this man on the far right, Paul Feos, who was a Hungarian avant-garde filmmaker. Made his name in Hollywood with a film about the last 5 minutes of the life of a man killing himself by drowning. Moved to Copenhagen, where he was supposed to be making romantic comedies for the Danish Film Corporation. These failed, and so he set off for Madagascar and decided to become an ethnographic filmmaker. He was also something of a pathological liar. He told people he had a medical degree when he didn't. He also told people that he met Axel Wenner when he saved him from being eaten by a tiger in a big game hunt. More likely, the two men met on one of Wenner-Gren's yachts in Singapore. Feos was the person who convinced Wenner-Gren to use the foundation to support anthropology, in the first instance to fund an amateur archaeology expedition to Peru that the two men took together. So I always like to tell the story, and the point of it is it's a grand historical accident that the Wenner-Gren Foundation for Anthropological Research even exists. And I think, here on the staff and among our reviewers and supporters, we feel an enormous responsibility comes out of that accident. And we're really here to support anthropology. That's what we do. We're not constrained by our founders or any donors or any government. The endowment is really for us. We relatively recently had a strategic planning process and, came up with a renewed mission. We're committed to playing a leadership role, advancing anthropological knowledge, building sustainable careers, and amplifying the impact of anthropology in the wider world, and dedicated to broadening the conversation to reflect the full diversity of the field. All of these are ways of advancing knowledge. I see our commitment towards inclusion, is demonstrated in our support for this conference, really is part of, doing a better job being anthropologists. One way of thinking about it is, our job is to save anthropology and make sure anthropology is worth saving. We have an endowment of around $165 million. We give away roughly $5.5 million per year. Most of that funding goes to our dissertation fieldwork grants and our post-PhD research grants. Within that, the dissertation fieldwork grants get the lion's share of our support. We get around 1,500 applications per year. We're only able to fund 15% of those projects. So one of the first things to know about Wenner-Gren is it's very, very hard to get our funding. So if you apply for one of our grants and you don't get it, you're allowed to feel bad for about 15 seconds. And then you should pat yourself on the back. You're in really good company. There's so many wonderful proposals that we're just not able to fund. It's especially hard to get our funding right now because in many ways, this is a watershed moment. With COVID-19, climate change, structural inequality, racial injustice, it's really a moment of reckoning for our societies and for our discipline, which is long overdue. The work of anthropologists has never been more important, but it's a very hard time to be doing this work. So right now, when we're looking for people to fund, when we're looking for projects to support, we really want to fund researchers who are ready to face the challenges ahead. And I've been giving this some thought over the past year or so. What are those challenges? Well, one of the challenges is intellectual. Grant proposals are always fictive. They're a story that indicates how in touch with the world and the issues that are important the applicant is, and whether they're able to formulate a viable plan for exploring the world and these issues that count. They're written at a particular point in time. The things that we study as anthropologists have a temporality. Not everything changes between the moment when you submit a proposal and the moment when you find out that you've gotten a grant, but some things certainly do. So when we decide to fund you as a researcher, we're not just endorsing your project, we're endorsing you as a thinker who is capable of coming up with anthropological ways of knowing the world. Now, it seems to me that current times are placing demands on us as thinkers that are more extreme than usual. They're not bad demands, they're demanding virtues that should always be there. The world always changes out from under us when we do research. Projects never unfold the way we would expect. But the challenge now is even more extreme. I see it as a challenge to get beyond a narrow kind of empiricism. My former colleague, Mayanti Fernando, has a lovely essay where she draws on Rolf Trio's insistence on the difference between an object of study and an object of observation. In Mayanti's case, her object of study, or object of observation, the people who she was studying were Muslim French people in Paris. But her object of study, the kind of issue that she wanted to get at, was French secularism and governmentality. Right now, we need to be able to zoom out to the broader phenomenon we're setting out to explore and think about asking questions that you can get at multiple routes. Again, because the world is going to change, the things that you thought were possible may not be possible by the time you get to the field. People who are starting their careers right now are really facing unique challenges. And I know those of you in this network have to be feeling this particularly vividly. But you also have a unique opportunity to apply anthropological ways of knowing in a period that's really world historical. It seems to me the things that are happening around the world right now are bringing into sharp focus the sorts of phenomena anthropologists are uniquely suited to make sense of. So, again, the challenge for us is we really want to fund thinkers who are nimble as they need to be, to face the challenges that the current moment is raising. So that's one challenge, the intellectual challenge. Then there's the methodological challenge that's really quite obvious in this moment. Now, I know here in the United States, I'm in New York City where the vaccination rate is around 70%, but there are many parts of the United States that, this is not the case. Needless to say, there are many parts of the world that are going to be in the grip of the pandemic with people dying and people getting sick for many, many months to come. So it seems to me when you're thinking about coming up with research in these uncertain times, you need to be able to come up with a project that's going to be safe and ethical in changing conditions. Nobody knows what 2022 is going to look like. As one of our grantees, pointed out just when all of this was hitting, is fieldwork is really the opposite of social distancing. There's a chance you'll be able to resume face-to-face methods by the time you receive one of our grants as an applicant, but there's also a chance you will not. So we need to think about how we're going to grapple with what is lost with the loss of the kind of first-person experience so much anthropological research depends on. When we can't meet with people face-to-face, what are we going to do? And it seems to me the online alone is not an answer, right? That we need to think much more broadly about methods. It also seems to me that this is a chance to reflect critically on the conditions that make first-person research possible. We often think as anthropologists, we just want to rush to doing interviews, to getting to the places where people live, to just sort of being there in the field amongst the people we want to study. And it seems like this moment when it's harder to do that than it's been in the past, it should also lead us to think about some of the things that we don't do in our rush to the field, but that maybe we should. A bunch of things that we overlook, in our hurry to get to face-to-face contact. And one of those things is developing contextual knowledge, really having an understanding of the context, where this problem is that you want to explore. Developing comparative knowledge, really thinking carefully about the research that anthropologists and related scholars have done on situations not unlike the one you want to understand. Developing deep historical knowledge, which is incredibly important. Learning from other researchers' data sets, Wenner Gren has a historical archives program where we help senior scholars and their heirs prepare research materials to be deposited in archives. I often wonder, do scholars who are setting out actually go out and look at those materials? There could be some really useful information there too. And then finally, and in some ways most importantly, learning to be an ally or critic by learning from other allies or critics. My own research on West Papua has a really rich activist community around it. There's so many things to learn from the people who've been really worrying about the problems in the territory for a long time. Again, I had firsthand experience with this when I was setting out to do my dissertation research. I didn't know whether I was going to get permission to go to West Papua. I wrote my funding proposals to include a large archival component, and I ended up doing quite a bit of research in the archives in the Netherlands before heading to West Papua. And in the end, I was able to get research permission to go there. And it turned out to be incredibly useful that I had. It opened up avenues of inquiry I wouldn't have had otherwise. I knew things going into the field that I wouldn't have known. But even more importantly, I found when I got to Biak, the island where I did my research, I ended up meeting with a lot of local historians, people who actually knew a lot about the island's history. And in some cases, interlocutors who'd read some of the Dutch text as I had. I was able to be so much more respectful of what people knew because I'd done my homework before arriving in the field. And this relates to the third challenge that, I think we need to think about, and that's the ethical challenge. It seems to me this moment also brings to light a problematic assumption that's long been present in many European and North American traditions of anthropology, that anthropologists should be free to go wherever and talk to whomever, and there's little cost of entry. It seems to me perhaps there should be. Assuming you can go in and simply interview people, wasting their time learning things you could have learned before arriving, reflects a particular kind of arrogance. And this is a good moment, it seems to me, to address it. We really need to think about the cost to participants of taking part in our research, deal openly with the risks, not just to the people you might be interviewing or from whom, if you're a biological anthropologist, for example, whom we fund too, you might be taking samples, but everyone involved in getting you to this place, the people who drive you, the people who meet you in the airport, everyone who you're in contact with. These issues are always there, but they've been easily overlooked, right? So this broader sense of risk. But then there's another sort of level to the ethical problem, which is, at a time when so many people around the world are so heavily burdened, we need to think not only about what you can do as an anthropologist, but why it's worth being done. How can we think about doing research that's really meaningful to everyone involved? So that's the sermon part of my presentation. I want to move on and talk a little bit about Wenner Gren's process. So we have a two-stage screening process. And this is, again, for our dissertation fieldwork and post-PhD research grants. We also include the Hunt postdoctoral fellowships in this batch as well. So there are two stages. Stage one is a screening stage where we cut the pool roughly in half. One reviewer reads each proposal and ranks it on a scale of 1 to 5. Proposals that rank 1 or 2 are automatically passed on for further review. Proposals that rank 4 or 5 are pretty much automatically declined at that point. Those that rank 3, we have some discretion internally. I go over every single piece of feedback that we receive from reviewers, so I'm able to kind of make some decisions. Often if someone has applied before and I feel like they could use further feedback, I might pass that one on if it's one that's ranked 3. At that point, we also think about our mission of supporting anthropology worldwide and fostering an inclusive vision. We've historically not done a great job of funding applicants from institutions in the global South. So in all things being equal situations, I might pass those proposals forward for further review. At stage 2, there's another panel of reviewers. 3 reviewers read each proposal and rank it on a scale of 1 to 5. Proposals that are ranked 2 and lower, and again, 1 is positive, that means definitely fund. 5 is, needs to be declined. Those that rank 2 and lower are pretty much definitely funded at that stage. unless it's a very unusual season. 2.3s are sometimes funded. We try to fund as many of those as we can. 2.7s and higher are generally declined. And again, we look at all of the feedback internally and evaluate it. And then we make decisions on an all things being equal basis. Again, we're thinking about, supporting scholars based in institutions in the global South and an all things being equal situation. And also someone who has, submitted several times, this might be their last chance, and they don't have any other funding, we might kind of think about, supporting that project in an all things being equal situation. And let me just say a word. A minute ago, I said, if you get declined by us, feel bad for 15 seconds. I want to say a word about getting declined at stage 1. If you get declined at stage 1, you can feel bad for about 15 seconds and pat yourself on the back. Again, we're forced to decline many excellent proposals at that point. Usually, if you're declined at stage 1, it could be that you have an extraordinarily interesting proposal, but you don't just have one question, you have 5 questions. You haven't figured out what the heart of the inquiry is yet. It's really good to find that out early so you have more time to revise and resubmit. You might have a great question, a great focus, but you haven't figured out the methods yet. Our screeners are really looking for ways that they can be helpful to you. So generally, at stage 1, a lot of projects that are just going to be extraordinarily interesting and important projects, they're declined because they're just not yet at the stage of development to make them competitive at stage 2. So again, in some ways, if we can give you useful feedback, it's good to get declined at stage 1 because you have more time to revise and resubmit. So what are our reviewers looking for? Well, they're looking for projects that move forward the conversation in anthropology. And here again, our history is important. We're really here to promote the discipline. You don't have to pretend you're anything other than an anthropologist to get our funding. We're looking for proposals that are focused. Applicants need to be asking a question that empirical research can answer. I think of empirical research, by thinking about the term experiment, which comes from the same root as experience. If you're doing empirical research, you're engineering experiences for yourself in the world that will put your assumptions to the test, that you're putting yourself in situations where your ideas about what is going on can be proven wrong. So those experiences could include doing a survey. It might even include quantitative research, having a large data set. That experience could also involve, hanging out in cafes or joining in activist projects. There are all sorts of experiences that you can use to call your assumptions to the test. The problem is that you need to be asking a question where you can be proven wrong. So that's the thing to really think about there. Okay, project proposals are focused on a question empirical research can answer. And again, not on 10 questions. We all know those first drafts of papers where you have a whole paragraph and every single sentence is a question. I do it all the time. You need to sort of develop your proposals until you figured out what question is at the heart of your interest. So that's the first requirement, focused. The second requirement is that proposals have to be for projects that are feasible. You need to be asking a question you can answer with the time and money available. And then there's the third requirement, which is in some ways the most important one. Your proposal needs to be legible. You can't have an impact on the field more generally if only a handful of people can understand you. And we understand that this is hard. I think it's particularly difficult for emerging scholars. I mean, I remember when I was a graduate student, I really was in the honeymoon period. My project was wonderful simply because it was my project. I just thought everyone should recognize how wonderful my project was. It was like having a new puppy. Your new puppy is the best possible dog in the world. And the same thing goes for your vocabulary. There's a lot of talk about jargon. One person's jargon is another person's precise terminology. We critique jargon, but really it's just the terms that people are trying to use. The issue is that early on, you can be really enamored of your terms, right? You can be in love with your terminology, and it's understandable. Your terms are allowing you to understand the world in new ways. Part of the task of a funding proposal is to introduce your terms to others, to get others to love the sort of theoretical perspectives you're using, which means you use precise terms sparingly, and you always introduce them. You always help people understand why you're using this concept and what kind of work it's going to be doing. So, when I'm thinking about how to make a proposal that's legible, again, just write generously. Put yourself in the position of the reviewer who's reading it, who's probably reading 20 in a row. So you really need to, again, provide them with a way of understanding what you're doing that's generous, that welcomes them in. It's fine to use terminology, but use it sparingly and introduce it. Make sure that other people can understand it and love it the way that you do. So, So these are some of the things I think to keep in mind. Our reviewers are looking for projects with the potential to really make a difference in the discipline more broadly. And so you need to put together your proposal so you're really making a case that that's the kind of project that you're doing. So I want to go over our project description questions, just to give you a sense of what kinds of questions we're going to ask. So the first project description question: describe the purpose of your research. What will be the focus of your investigation? What is your main research question? What other questions will you need to answer to address it? And here we've added a clause sort of about the current moment. Please note, we will be evaluating your application in the context of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. You should formulate your research objectives clearly and carefully. Find a focus that will allow you to address your questions through a range of different avenues. So you want to work very hard on the very first paragraph in your answer to this very first question. It's probably what you'll draw upon for your abstract. The abstract is a very important part of your proposal. Again, internally in the staff, we read every single abstract we receive. We use them to select reviewers. So it's really important to get your abstract right. You want to begin with a big question or debate in the field your findings will address, and then narrow into the specific question you'll ask. So you might have one question that's at the heart of the inquiry, and then other questions you need to answer to get at that most important question, that core question to your research. So that's project description 1. Project description 2. How does your research draw inspiration from existing scholarship in anthropology and other disciplines? Whose findings will you be building on? Give specific examples of the various lines of work with which you're in dialogue and which you're seeking to advance. Now, this should be like the story of how you arrived at your question and how you came up with your strategies for answering it. You want to use sources in other languages and other fields. If you are someone who is, from Europe and is going to be working in Brazil, for example, there is a rich tradition of anthropological work in Brazil on many topics, and probably on yours. Our reviewers come from all over the world, and they will notice if you're not citing the scholarship in the languages, and in the literatures of local scholars in the places where you want to work. So again, really think carefully and broadly. One way of thinking about the literature review is, say you're at, you're walking down the street, you're at a conference and we're actually meeting in person, you're walking down the hall and you come upon a group of your friends and they're engaged in a conversation. If you want to contribute to that conversation, you need to listen first, right? And again, in your answer to this question, show that you're listening to the conversations around the topics that are relevant to your proposal, right? But then you also want to add something new. You want to bring something in that hasn't already been said. You don't simply repeat the last thing that you heard when it comes time for you to, contribute to the conversation. You want to bring in something new. So you're in your answer to project description 2, you're showing us how you're listening to conversations around your question, but you're bringing in something new. You might be bringing something in from, another tradition of writing within anthropology. You might be reviving old work on exchange to speak to recent interests in infrastructure, for example. So really show how you're bringing things together in a new and creative way. Okay, so this takes me to project description question 3. A. So this is the methodology, and we ask you to fill out this question twice. So what evidence will you need to collect to answer your research question? How will you go about collecting and analyzing this evidence? And here we're interested in the best case scenario, a description of the research activities you'll use if you're able to travel and meet in person with research participants and collaborators safely and ethically. You want to use all the space in all the questions, but particularly in your question 3. So here's where you're talking about your specific plan. So you do it once for 3A, where, you know, in-person research is possible, and then you do it again, plan B. In addition to the plans laid out above, we need to know you've developed a strategy that will allow you to address your research questions should the pandemic continue or worsen. If you're unable to travel or meet in person with research participants and collaborators, how will you address your research questions? What methods will you use to ensure your research is safe and ethical should COVID-19 restrictions remain in place? So use all the space when you're answering all the questions, but particularly in these 2 answers where you're going to talk about your plans. And one way that you can structure this is to take the questions you presented in your answer to question 1 and even just cut and paste them and then discuss the methods you're going to use to answer them. It's really a nice way to check to see that you're actually asking questions that empirical research can answer. And it also helps you begin to really put your head around, what methods do I need to use to address these questions? What makes a proposal really good is when all of the parts work together. Everything is integrated. What you learn in your answer to question 1 is related to the answer to question 2, is related to the answer to question 3. So here's a really good way, you know, a good moment to really kind of think about how it is your methods are speaking to your questions. And that's often a problem, I think, you know, with proposals. We get so excited about the literature on the phenomena that we want to explore. We get so excited about our question that we forget we actually need to do research to address it, right? So, you know, by really drawing a direct connection between your answers to these 2 questions, you can be sure that your application holds together and it's describing a project that's really going to yield results. So think broadly and creatively about methods, archival work, comparative work, epistolary work, that's using letters and journals back and forth, existing field notes and data set, you know, gray literature, non-academic literature, media analysis, museum collections, and online interviews and observations, really thinking about the broad range of ways in which you can address your question. And I've been excited to see applications over the past couple of cycles really thinking creatively about methods. It's a really good time to do that. And you'll want to make a case for why these methods will be safe and ethical in the place where you plan to work. Okay, so then there's the budget and also, feasibility as well. The budget, one is for plan A, the other is for plan B. And here's maybe the most important thing I can tell you right now. Be sure the total for both budgets matches. If we do decide to fund you, we want to know that we could switch from plan B to plan A or from plan A to plan B with the same grant total. One of the things that we've done in these times is really expand the range of things that we'll cover. We will cover your living expenses wherever you are. You know, if you're doing virtual research from Zagreb, we will pay your rent and utilities and living expenses in Zagreb. We pay research assistants at a much higher level. A lot of the projects that we're seeing now are very deeply collaborative, involving work between researchers in 2 different places. So we will cover that. And what we've called gifts for informants, I call it fair compensation for the time of your interlocutors. We cover that. Internet access for participants, equipment for participants, cell phones. A lot of people are asking for cell phones for their interlocutors in the field. Transcription and translation, reproduction costs, postage, childcare, wherever you are. We understand that that's an important need. So again, you can think creatively, just be sure the 2 budgets align. One thing we will not fund, we do not fund trips home or to conferences unless that's part of your field work. You know, that's kind of about it. If you're going to ask for an expensive piece of equipment, we ask you to donate it at the end of your research. Other than that, you can be really creative. We had a grantee who was working on coral reefs in Indonesia who got funding for advanced diving training. So again, think creatively about your budget. Okay, so that takes me to question 4. Why are you the right person to carry out this project? We're interested in how you've prepared yourself for this research, language, competence, technical skills, previous research, other relevant experience, what work you've already done, how it relates to other research you've done. If you're working with academic collaborators, what's their role? How does it relate to yours? But this is an addition. We're also interested in how you became committed to doing this work. Please tell us about your background and your relationship to the community or communities affected by your work. Okay. Why are you the right person to be assessing that your project is safe and ethical? That's one of the things our reviewers are looking at in your answer to this question. What puts you in a position not just to do the research effectively and ethically, but also to assess changing risks in your site? And then finally, project description 5, which is short but deadly. You only get 500 words to answer this one. What contribution will your project make to anthropology? Please note that the Foundation's mission is to support innovative research and researchers. We're interested in funding scholars who will do more than simply add to an existing body of knowledge. How will your project bring new insights to the field as a whole and help the discipline live up to its full potential? So again, this is the what's the point question. You don't want it to be too broad and you don't want it to be too specific. Not over ambitious, not under ambitious. It's the last thing a reviewer will read. And where you started in your answer to question 1, you began broad and went narrow. You talked about a broad problem or issue in the field and then went narrow to the specific questions. Here, begin narrow. Start with the specific questions that your work is going to answer and then broaden out to its implications. Okay. Your project should contribute new knowledge and build capacity in the field. Other people working on very different topics and problems should benefit from what you've done. So think broadly about why, for example, if you're working, say you're working in Southern France, why should I work on disability in the US? Why should I care about what you find in your research? So again, really thinking about why it is that people would be interested in finding out what it is you want to know. Okay, so just a couple parting thoughts. We want to support as much anthropological research as we can. We are especially eager to support precarious scholars, graduate students, and recent PhDs who are facing all sorts of obstacles in moving forward in their careers. But we also have an ethical obligation to those affected by our research, and we're taking that seriously as well. So I want to just say a few words about our longstanding programs. We have a Hunt postdoctoral fellowship for ethnographic writing. The next deadline is actually 2022 for that. That's a 9-month fellowship that supports you while you finish writing up your work. If any of you are interested in that, please ask questions about it, because I think it can be really useful for people, especially who are working in the European context, where often you end up getting pulled into postdocs and don't have a lot of time to work on your own work. We have a fellowship for ethnographic film. Again, the next deadline will be next year, 2022. And these are for film and, broadly speaking, media projects, that are approaching the final stages of completion. So bringing it through production into distribution. Wadsworth International Fellowship, which are for students from areas where, doctoral training in anthropology is less accessible to study at established programs around the world. Wadsworth African is devoted to students from Africa who are studying in South African universities. We have conference and workshop grants, which CF has one of them this time around. The next deadline is December 1st, 2021. Apologies for the out-of-date dates. Wenner Gren Symposia. These are Wenner Gren hosted events. Our next one is The Price of Wealth in October 2021, which will bring together economists and anthropologists. We'll have another one coming up in the spring, Populism, Anthropological Approaches, which will be anthropologists, political theorists, and activists. Our symposia, we really focus on crossing boundaries between disciplines and areas of intellectual production, and boundaries that are not often cross. So I think The Economist and Anthropologist is a good model, the sort of thing that we want to do with that. Current Anthropology, Sapiens, our magazine for non-anthropologists, read over 8 million times. If you have an interest in reaching broad audiences with your work, please consider looking into pitching a story for Sapiens. It's also a place where you can learn to write for broader audiences. So it's really, I think, a good resource for the discipline. A historical archives program, which I mentioned. And we support public conversations. These are a few. You can look on our blog. There are recordings of all of them. And then disciplinary conversations as well. So I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about a couple of our newer programs. We have engaged research grants, which are supporting research partnerships that empower those who have historically been among those researched in anthropology rather than researchers themselves. Designed in alliance with individuals who's borne the impact of various kinds of marginalizations. Partnerships bring together scholars and their interlocutors in the mutual production of anthropological knowledge aimed at combating inequality and promoting the flourishing of human and not more than human worlds. Projects should make a significant contribution to anthropological conversations through collaborations in which engagement is a central feature of the project from the start. Our first deadline is August 1st, 2021. And these projects are really projects in which engagement is a central focus from the very beginning. So all of the kind of questions that I've talked about for our other grant programs, are answered here as well. But the answers to them are developed in collaboration with research partners who are not academics necessarily. So these are projects done in collaboration with your interlocutors, and they're working towards addressing questions, getting a handle on problems that are meaningful to everyone involved, that they're both going to contribute to anthropological knowledge, but also make a difference and be meaningful to the research participants. So, this is an increasingly important aspect of anthropological work. So if you're at all interested in this, feel free to reach out. The program officer for this program would be happy to answer any questions. I can answer any questions too. We have global initiatives grants, which support innovative collaborative initiatives that build capacity in anthropology. During the first round, we supported projects, addressing the impact of COVID-19 on anthropology. In this recent round, we supported projects addressing racial injustice within anthropology, and going forward, we'll probably have another theme for next year that'll be announced soon. So if you're interested in doing collaborative initiatives that don't fall under any of our other granting programs and actually build capacity, please think about this. And then finally, Wenner Gren seminars, which are going to be intergenerational workshops, and they'll be held in conjunction with major international conferences. And again, bringing together anthropologists of different generations to talk about issues central to the discipline, both professional and theoretical issues. Next deadline for letters of intent will be April 2022. So last but not least, the Sapiens Public Fellowship, which is a 2-year internship for someone with a recent PhD with Sapiens to help you build a career in public media and science communication. The next deadline will be August 15th, 2022, and the portal for that should be online soon. So that's all I have to say. Thank you for your attention, and I would love to answer any questions you might have.
Nada, we cannot hear you. Put your mic on.
Sorry. No matter how many times you use Zoom, you always make this mistake. So thank you. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I think everybody will benefit from knowing a little bit more about the process. But since we're kind of short on time, I'm just going to rush to the questions and ask if anybody would like to ask something. Just you can just show up on camera, turn on your camera, and raise your hand, or if you're shy, you can write it in chat.
We also have questions through the Hoover platform that I can copy over.
Yes, we do have a question. I can just read it, if that's okay. So We have Caroline asking, what are the possibilities for non-academic projects concerning the domain of public anthropology?
So that's a really good question. We have supported projects supporting public anthropology through our conference and workshop grants. We've supported them during COVID. We had the Wenner Gren webinars on the future of anthropological research. We supported public anthropology projects through that. For individuals who are interested in doing public anthropology, again, I mentioned the Sapiens Public Fellowship. I can also imagine a global initiatives grant, which would be building capacity in public anthropology. That would be another thing to think about. And then finally, and this again, it would need to kind of have a connection to research, but we're expecting the Engaged Research Grant winners to actually have components. We want them to talk about how they're going to disseminate results, so that they have an impact beyond academia. There will be a public anthropology component to many of those projects too. So there are a number of different avenues. And, if you want to get in touch with me and, I can kind of maybe direct you to which one of our programs might make the most sense.
Okay, thank you. And we have Fiona asking whether you fund projects which utilize autoethnography.
Absolutely. We definitely fund projects that utilize autoethnography. Again, it needs to be a good proposal. It needs to be contextualized, one of the things, anyway, I'll just riff for a moment, but we don't completely understand ourselves. We know this is anthropology, that we are, bound up in contexts that, we're not aware of all the forces that shape us. And I think, with the ongoing struggle for racial justice going on in the United States, I think that more and more people, in particular white Americans, are becoming aware of this, that we are bound by forces beyond our control. We don't understand ourselves. So autoethnography needs to really be taking that into account. So all of the things I said about methods, about learning from archives, learning from activists, learning from comparative work, I feel like all those things apply, when you're doing autoethnography, and in some ways they're even more important. So, yeah.
Okay, I think we have time for two more questions, and then because people are starting to leave, so we should probably wrap up. So we have a question from Roger asking, how does one decide between submitting an article to an easy journal or to a top-ranking one? What are some of the considerations to keep in mind?
Oh, that's an interesting question. It's not part of my job right now, but, I can give you just some reflections from my own experience. Look at the articles that are being published in the journals that you're vaguely thinking about submitting to, and seeing if they resonate with you. Think about what journals are you looking to when you're looking for insights to help you write your own pieces, right? And that's one way to think about it. Instead of just thinking about status, first and foremost, actually thinking about company. What kind of company do you want your work to be in? Because people who write in journals also read those journals, right? So looking at the sorts of people who are publishing in different journals, who do you want to be in conversation with? That's really an important thing, I think, to think about. And the other thing to think about is look at the constraints. There are some journals that are very, very strict in terms of the length of the piece, right? And there's some pieces that need to be long, right? Don't try to shoehorn something into a short package that needs to be in a long package, or vice versa. Think about these things as well. So you want to have a really positive experience when you're publishing something. You want to get really good feedback. Even if you get declined in the end, you want to come out of that experience better for having gone through it. So really, I think more important than just status is, what is the vibe of the publication? Is this a place that's going to help you develop as a scholar or not? Ultimately, it may be the piece that you're doing now, it's a less prestigious journal, but it's right on your topic and it's going to be a great experience. What you learn through that experience means that maybe sometime you'll have something that's appropriate for a high status journal. It'll help you having gone through that process. So that would be my advice. Yeah.
Thank you. I think this is kind of a good way of thinking about it as a conversation, and who do you want to be in company with. Okay, and one last question is from Piyush. She says, for the Hunt Writing Fellowship, I'm a bit confused by how you write about the aims and questions of your project. What I mean is you've already done the investigation and answering your research questions. So on the application, do you just write about what you have already found and why you think it will be worth converting your thesis into a book?
Okay, yes, sorry. I didn't actually put up the Hunt questions. The Hunt questions are different. So there's a question about what is your book about? What problem are you addressing in your book? And then there's a question that asks you to describe the research that you've done, the methods you used, your findings, right? So it's sort of like, what is the book? The second one, what is the research that the book is coming out of? And then you're asked to kind of provide a detailed outline of what the book is going to look like. And then you're asked, the kind of, what's the point? What are the broader sort of resonances of this book? You get more space to answer some of the questions than you do in the regular research grants. So yeah, if you want to go on our website, you'll find the Hunt Postdoctoral Fellowships. We have a programs page. You can click on that and then you can get yourself to the questions, and the questions, and there's a nice explanation of how to answer them. For all of our programs, you can find that resource. So, even if you've heard me talk, you want to go to our website and kind of look at the specific instructions. We try to be really helpful there too.
Definitely. Thank you. Since we're running out of time and people want to go to other events, I'm sure, I just want to ask you, is there a way to get in touch with you? Should people have some additional questions about the presentation or any other aspect of the foundation?
Absolutely. Feel free to email me. If you go to wennergren.org, if you go to our website, I'm super easy to find. I also have a weird name. I'm just generally easy to find. So feel free to reach out. It's Drutherford, my first initial, at wennergren.org. But you don't have to remember that. Just, Google me and you'll find me. Yeah.
Terrific. Well, thank you. Thank you again so much for sharing your time and expertise with us. And I'm sure we all learned quite a lot today.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And, I'm sorry we ran out of time, but again, really do feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I'd be happy to address them. Yeah.
Okay, Danielin, tell me about a strange name. Huh? Thank you so much. It was so informative. And if you look at the chat, you will see so many of thank you notes, and it's been so useful.
Uh-huh.
It was useful for me as well. So I'm sure that the early career scholars, I've seen some of them writing down notes all the time. So I think they will have some questions in the process after they consume the whole thing. So if I could ask also the young scholars working group to be some kind of mediators also to address these questions or direct them towards you. Thank you so much for this contribution, and thanks to all of you for attending it. I hope it was useful experience for you. And do apply to Wenner Gren.
Do apply. Do apply. Thanks so much, everyone. I really appreciate it.